Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Instead of doing a league match on Thursdays in the league that I normally play in, today there was instead a blitz tournament where each of the team's top 4 or 5 players' scores counted in an arena battle on Lichess. So I'm going to be showing every single game I played. It was 5 minutes plus 3 seconds increment with the option to berserk, where you would start with 2.5 minutes instead and get double the points. An hour and a half was the length of time of the tournament. I played throughout, and I'll try and do all the games analysis in about 20 minutes. So first game, I'm playing against someone I've had a few blitz games against. I generally come off better, but I believe he has got, a point against me or so. He's decided to play a Benko Gambit. I'm refusing to accept the pawn sacrifice. Well, I kind of have, but I'm refusing to take on a6. And castles, h3, to prevent bishop g4 and knight g4. Now he takes, and I do choose to accept. And I think he can't do knight takes d5 because queen takes d5. So bishop a6, I trade, and castles. And with the fact that I've played e3, in a way it's almost a favourable version of the Benko, because he can't play bishop d4 in the future. However, it's hard for my pieces to get out, and just like most Benonis and Benkos, Black's queenside attack, if allowed to continue, will be very awkward for me. So I do guard everything with the queen, but then he comes along and swaps them off, which was a very good idea, because now I decide to keep my queenside pawns, but lose a central pawn. So really not good for me. I'm definitely feeling under a lot of pressure here. And he starts coming in, attacking everything, and I feel like I might have to offer a draw quite soon. Maybe I can tempt him into taking the draw offer. So after rook a8, I defend and attack it simultaneously, and then his next move, knight c3, going for this big attack on my rook, my b2 pawn, my knight. It looks good, but I think it backfires because I take with the knight. He takes back with the bishop, thinking that if I take his bishop, he will take back with the knight, and maybe he has something or other. Although even then, I'm not so sure. If bishop takes bishop, though, I thought he may have had d5. So I took his knight. This is looking very, very good for me. He tries keeping the piece on and taking off both my pawns. But knight d2, attacking his rook. He brings it back. I play rook c4 to go to c2. And I achieve this. And then his next move, rook a1, is attempting to kind of pin my rook to my bishop on e1, and also attacking my king. So perhaps he doesn't have enough. I don't have enough to win the piece. However, I saw the move rook takes b2 from c3. If he does rook takes b2 from b7, I will take on a1, and I'll stay 2 pieces up. He took on b1 with an X-ray attack, but then I just took with the rook. I'm defended by the knight. So here he chose to resign. Good first game, although I definitely was in trouble in the middle parts of that match. Next game, I'm white yet again, playing against another up-and-coming player, and he chooses the Slav with a very solid, I think the Moran system is the name, but I might be off, but then switches it to a Stonewall Dutch. And that's a good setup, actually, for black, because normally I like my knight on d2, not c3. I like my knights to be connected. He gets knight e4 into the mix, which is the usual move in the Stonewall. I then come in with f3, trying to kick away his knight. He trades. Even though my pawns are doubled, I'm not too upset with that. I can play taking on d5 and then reinforce the attack on the d5 pawn with my other c pawn coming to c4. So knight f6, bishop g5, attempting to activate my dark squared bishop. Queen e8 going to h5, common idea in the Stonewall. I play e4, and then after queen to h5, I realise that my e4 pawn is a bit weak, and my bishop doesn't really want to take their knight. So I played queen d2. And then he played h6, and I thought that perhaps taking was correct, although I was a bit nervous of g takes f6, attacking my knight where I don't really have anywhere to go. So I was going to either play g4 or just sacrifice the piece and take a loss on d5. But instead he took with the bishop. It's made things a lot easier for me. Then I came up with c4. We trade a few more times. If I don't yet get a nice attack, it might be the case that the game is level. However, black has not yet connected their rooks, so I'm able to take the opportunity to trade rooks and then come in with a check, gaining time. Take twice on d5, because if he takes with the queen, I have bishop h7, which would do a discovered attack on black's queen from my own one. Bishop d7, bishop c4, lining up with the king. E8, d6, king h8. I try queen d5, thinking that if we trade queens, I have a very good chance to win the game in the endgame. But no, he checks. Bishop c6, now he's getting the counterattack. I choose queen f7, and then queen e4, and suddenly I realise there's so much under attack. I have my bishop, which is potentially being attacked, and my g2 pawn, which also, if taken, it'll be checkmate. And the third attack is the idea queen e1. Queen e1 will potentially checkmate me on the back rank. I choose rook g1, rook d6, d8, going for the pawn. Queen e7, I'm trying to trade the queens as best I can, and that will give me a very powerful e7 pawn. He does not wish to do that, and I finally choose to trade the queens. Here, I'm not sure I have enough. So what I do is I make sure that I'm not losing the d-pawn by putting the rook on d1. We trade. I still have chances with the d-pawn. However, if he brings his king over, there's a very good chance he may end up actually winning if he wins that d-pawn. But here he makes a key mistake. I think he has to play king g8, and then my idea will not work. But instead he plays g5, and after my bishop g4, it's practically resignable now. If he traded bishops, I would push the d-pawn to the end. He must give up the bishop, and then the rest of it is fairly simple. I bring the king to the center of the board. I prevent his pawns from running up where he has the majority on the queen side. Then my king comes in to win the kingside pawns. He's pushing all the way down the board, taking the pawns, then making sure I don't lose to his own pawns running up. Push my pawns, and then at the key moment I play the critical move, bishop takes pawn. Give up my bishop in order to eliminate all his counter chances, and then push my h-pawn, and he resigns. So far 2 out of 2. Our team was first place, but we were close to the other teams. My next game is against another chess coach, and we've played a few times, although I think he might have the better of me in blitz. His opening knowledge is fairly extensive, so in this game I chose to play a Caro-Kann with a almost Moran type setup from that Dutch Stonewall game I played a while ago, and my aim is to get rid of the light squared bishops. This greatly diminishes white's attacking chances if I castle kingside. We trade. White must still be a little better because of the weird nature of my piece development. And my idea is to play a bit like in the French. If I can put my knight on g8 to f5, I should get a relatively okay position attacking the d4 pawn. So that's what I aim to do. Rook d1 played by white. I then choose to trade bishops only because the d4 pawn is now a bit weaker because their knight has come from f3 to capture on g5. So with my quick c5, I'm not scared of any queen checks because I can march the king to f8, where it will function similarly to if it had castled. Knight b5 though is chosen to protect the pawn, threaten knight d6, and also potentially play c3. I go with queen d7 to pressure the knight, threatening the trap, pawn c4, which will attack his queen and then it will not be guarding his knight anymore. c4, very good move. Then a few trades occur, with both of us being fairly happy to go into the ending, well, the late middle game, let's say, the transition to the end game. Knight f3, I choose to trade, even though my king is still a bit weak and underdeveloped. I now take the time to castle because white's attack is greatly reduced through the trades of pieces. I come forward. I don't like moving backwards to d7 or b7. Rook c1, a6 to go b5, protecting my knight. Then rook d6 and b5 to give myself the c4 square. If I can bring my knight to c4, guarded by the b5 pawn, I will be doing very well. First, though, let's connect the pieces together with rook c8. My rooks are connected, attacking on the c-file. Knight c3, a nice move, because if he takes with a rook, I will take back with my c8 rook, winning the material. And instead of c4, my knight chooses to go to d5. And rook takes a6 can't really be done, because rook c1 check would be devastating for white. Therefore, g3 gives his king an escape route. I trade. Queen b7 to defend my pawn and simultaneously attack his rook. He saves it. I offer the trade again. He threatens a mate attack with queen h7, but I prevent it with g6. Knight e4 pirouetting around, threatening knight d6 and maybe knight f6 check. I trade. And his pawn move gives him a passed pawn, but it gives me what's called the outside passed pawn, the pawn that's furthest away from the centre, which will mean his king will, if it was just a king and pawn endgame, his king would be further away from the centre, meaning I would gain the advantage. So I push, and then he took, which I think is sensible. I did think about taking with the pawn, which may also be very strong, but I thought the queen trade would help me, to be honest. Knight takes, in order to stop his c-pawn moving up, and also my a-pawn. Passed pawns, or pawns that can't be stopped, on the edge of the board, so h and a files, are notoriously difficult for knights to deal with. So his knight will have a difficult time if I can bring my king over and get my pawn rolling. f4, good move. All his pawns and my pawns are being protected with a pawn chain. And I'm ready to go king c6. And then he played the move king to e3, which is the only way to protect his c-pawn by going king d4. But this gave me the chance to play knight d5, trading knights. Trade here. King c6. And I have the outside passed pawn. So a4. a3, forcing his king to the edge. My king comes across. Then it runs to his pawns. And I played a really key move, I think, h4. If I had moved my king too far, it would have had to go all the way to h2, and his king only needs to go to f7. So I think it would actually be either a draw or a win for white. But my move h4 means if he takes me, my king just needs to take his f-pawn and then his e-pawn. And I'm much, much faster than his king to get to the f-pawns. So I should win because my g-pawn holds both his h-pawns. He went king b5, I traded. Now I just need to run to g3, not to h2. That's saving me 2 turns. And because of this, I win by, essentially by a move. If it was white's turn again, it might actually be a win for white, or a draw at best. If he does king takes f7, I'll take on e5, or go king to f5. And when he went king f6, I'm sure g5 wins as well, but I just wanted to be careful and went king e4. Now he must move the king, and I'll take on e5 and have at least the e-pawn left at the end. So overall, I'd been playing well, 3 out of 3. This next game, I was playing a somewhat weaker player, but I have seen his games, and he does sometimes have flashes of playing at a much higher level than is indicated by the 1700 rating here. So we play a Sicilian line. It's a kind of pet system of mine. It looks like a Keres Sicilian, but not really. It's an early g4 without castling queenside. I need to be very, very careful, because if black can play d5 at the right moment, then things can backfire, and I end up being badly developed. But I try the pawn storm. Black's trying the classic a6 b5 plan. I trade, and he takes with the f-pawn. And actually, a few of my students do this, because they think that the rook on f8 is now a lot more powerful. However, it weakens the diagonal to the king on g8 from a2 or b3 or c4. So very dangerous for black. And that's highlighted by his move knight d7, And then knight e6. If his pawn had been on f7 and he'd taken with his h-pawn, I would never have had this tactic. He actually resigned here because he is losing the exchange at least, or even I could take his bishop instead, and he does not really have any counterattack. So that was a nice game. 4 out of 4. Our team was clearly in front. One of my teammates was doing excellently. He's rated about 2250 or so, maybe a little higher, but he was berserking in most games and seemed to be getting the better of his opponents. My next game was against a player from, I think, Barking, who is about 2200, indicated here by the rating. He chose the Exchange Slav, so I know the system fairly well, and I play a solid a6 and e6 to solidify and then castle kingside fairly quickly in this position. Although bishop d7 is a nice move to do before castling, because it allows me to defend my c6 knight and get an early pawn break, or not pawn break, pawn storm, with b5 and then queen b6, going for queenside play. Then white immediately decides to go g4, which is very aggressive. And I think I may have reacted badly here, because I thought I saw a tactic with knight takes knight, but it turns out that my tactic is not exactly well suited to this position. My whole plan had been attacking the queen side, so I shouldn't have tried this very speculative plan of basically sacrificing a piece in order to come in and attempt to do checkmates on the king. He was able to defend it, and fairly soon, with a few accurate moves, my attack dwindles into nothing. And the rest of it, as they say in the old textbooks on chess, is technique. He comes in, he wins the exchange as well because of my horrible weakening of my own king. Then I try to arrange checkmates in some way, but there's nothing I can really do. And I missed the move queen g5 for whatever reason, and he came in. There's loads of mating attacks. I'm sure he could have mated me even faster. Here, queen c7 mated one, but he got there nonetheless, and I got mated. So good win from my opponent. That was my first loss of the game, of the tournament. So I had to build up the streak of wins. My next opponent's rated 1300, so this was my first game where I berserked, and so did he. So we get this queen's pawn opening, but then with e4 we go into a kind of Black Mardima gambit. White's giving up e4 to gain initiative. I'm not terribly concerned about the e4 pawn. However, if he's allowing me to keep it, I won't complain. So I do keep the pawn. And then after d5, this felt a little bit too early. So I had the move knight takes d5, where attacking his bishop on g5. When he takes on e7, I take back with the knight, and I won a pawn. He wins it straight back. I won a pawn, then lost a pawn, but I was a pawn up at the beginning anyway of that sequence. So I'm still a little bit ahead. I'm attacking his bishop and knight on the diagonal b7 to g2. But he went knight f6, I think forgetting my knight on c5's guarding my bishop. I took, he took, I took. Although maybe I should have traded queens first. However, he allows me to trade queens in a strange way after my knight c5, knight d4 move, which unfortunately allows me to win the rook at the end. So he resigned. And again, that's partly due to him berserking, because both of us used up only about a minute on our times. Next game, I'm playing against the same player as before. Because I won the first game, I was feeling confident, so I berserked. Chose a different setup though, with a Nimzo Larsen, bishop b2. Tried to treat it like a d4 opening, but a little bit differently, almost Queen's Indian style as white. And c6, black is setting up a modest setup, which is very useful against an isolated d-pawn would be great for black. I don't really want to isolate my pawns. I take with the knight. Queen a5, I improve. Queen h5, going for the kingside attack. And then I played bishop e2. He got out of the way of my bishop lined up with his queen. Then his knights are going to d5, I believe. So I attempt to improve my pieces, and then he traded, which is useful. I wanted a few trades, because I feel like the longer we play and the more we get towards an endgame, the better. And also I'm starting to feel a bit nervous about my time situation. Down to a minute. Trade some more pieces though, and I stop checkmate. Knight f6. I was thinking about trading, but I don't really like giving up my fianchettoed b2 bishop. And essentially, I think he's happy to take a drawish position here. But I'm still going for that win. I've got to justify my 600-point difference. Capture a pawn. And then, unfortunately, he tries getting out of the way of my bishops. But I had the move rook takes d6. And if rook takes d6 back, I would take on c7, I think. But instead he tried knight e8, going for some clever tactic, but it doesn't work because I can trade rooks and then play queen e7, threatening both the rook, the knight, and queen f8 checkmate. So it's a win for me. Then, oddly enough, one of the only games where both of us berserk again. This guy was berserking every game practically, and at the end of the tournament it worked out very well for him because he got, I think, 5 wins in a row. So he, quote-unquote, won the tournament. He got the most points out of anyone. However, my team performed above his team in the end. But we go into a Caro-Kann setup, where this time I do choose to play e5. And then I don't take the pawn, even though taking it's the main move. I thought it would be interesting to play like a Albin counter gambit with knight ge7, knight g6, and then knight takes e5. But when he castled, I then got cold feet and chose to take the pawn. I've lost the bishop pair. However, I'm hoping that with the regaining of the bishop pair, things should be fine. Knight d2, developing pieces. I play rook e8. Knight b3, going for the bishop. I retreat. Bishop f4, very good move. I connect the rooks. He improves his worst piece. All very well played from him. Actually, no, I was wrong. This game I didn't berserk, and he did. So this was the only game where that happened. And then I played knight g6, and then he had a moment of madness with his berserking. He chose rook takes d5, forgetting he was hanging the rook on e1, so I checkmated. A rather fast end to the game. Again, I'm playing the same player as before, who's also now we're reversing the colours. I chose to attempt to punish him for playing the London system against me. Classically, a very, very solid setup. And if he's having to play queen c1 at move 5, that usually means white has not played the ideal setup. I play a5, which is a very rare idea. The point of it is to restrain white on the queen side and basically show that that's where I'm going to attack. And d5, gaining space. Knight e4, this is also very aggressive. I don't need to be doing this. Bishop e7 is probably better. h3, though, gives me the chance to play f5. Then bishop e7. Bishop h2 being safe. However, this passivity is definitely allowing me to get away with these not ideal moves. King h1, again a safety move, and then I plan to bring my bishop around. But first I trade pieces to put my rook on c8, lining up with his queen. He saw my threat, knight takes d4, gets his queen out of the way. And then I bring my bishop around, lining up with his bishop and queen. His move f4 allows me to jump in to e4 again. And then a strange maneuver. My plan is to protect my knight on e4 with my other knight. So if he ever takes it, I'll have reinforcements. And my bishop on g6 is awful, so I intend to trade it for a knight. So I fulfill my 2 plans. Then he takes with the pawn, unlike the last game where we played, where he could have taken with the pawn to trap a piece. I did think about sacking my knight, but in the end I thought, no, I'll let him have the e6 pawn. It's basically a bystander anyway. And it may clear a line on the e and f files, which is what happened. So even though I've lost a pawn or two, I'm actually still quite pleased with the position I have. my rooks, bishop and knight are all good, and my queen is tying down his knight. He doesn't care though, so I take on b2, then take on a2. He comes in, rook on the 7th, going for me. I counterattack with knight to h5. He comes in, knight f5, going for me. But then I think what he missed was both knight takes f4 might even be more winning than what I played. Bishop takes f4 though is extremely effective, threatening queen takes bishop mate. When he took, I took back, and I'm threatening the queen on d3, and I'm threatening queen g2 mate. And I don't think he could see a good way to protect against both, so he resigned. This was now late into the tournament, last few games, so that meant that I berserked against the 1700, but then both of us blunder a whole lot. I choose to play a Grand Prix attack in the Sicilian lines, attempting to win very quickly, which I may have achieved, but it wasn't by playing well. e5 is an unusual move, but the point of it is that if black plays the classical d5 against white, I can take en passant, and black will not have a d5 pawn. I go for the cheeky knight e4, hoping he'll protect his c5 pawn, then I can play knight d6 check. Instead, castles is played. I don't take the bait. I play d3, attempting to develop my pieces. Knight d4, c3. I don't want a pawn on d4. Sorry, knight on d4. He comes back. Again, I'm resisting temptations to take the c5 pawn, and then choose to attack his king side. He takes my bishop, and apparently taking it on c4 is clearly best. I chose to take because I saw a nice trick. Knight b6, then I play f6, always play f6 when you're white. Bishop h8, I bring in the queen, and then bring in the queen more. I'm threatening Lolly's mate, queen to g7, so his bishop must stay on the board. But I was also threatening knight to g5, going for the h7 pawn, so he attempts to trade off all his, or at least my attackers, and lose a piece of 2 pawns. However, I play this horrible move, knight to g5, refusing to take his knight, and he can't do anything here. Bishop g7 is what I would have done, but then I have knight takes knight check, so I've gained a tempo by not taking him first. Then however he takes me, I take on h7 mate. So that's a good win. Our team was now clearly ahead, and there was only about 5 or 6 minutes left in the arena battle. And if your game does not finish in time before the clock runs out, it doesn't count towards your team's final score, although it's still a rated game. So I was playing one of the leaders of the tourney on 2150, who was playing well. And I choose the Fincasode system of the King's Indian. And essentially, I don't like to learn tons of theory in this line. So I'm trying to take it into a sideline, which he also seemed to be happy with. Bishop d7, then knight b8. h3, preventing g4. a5 is a good move, stopping me going b4 and c5. I still attempt to do it with a3. Queen c8, king h2, queen e8. Here I should have gone b3 to then try and go b4 later on. But I chose rook b1, which I think is inaccurate, because a4 prevents me going b4. I still try, but he takes en passant. So I'll never have a pawn on b4, meaning his knight can occupy c5 without being evicted. I trade, attempting to get my a pawn to be a winning trump card at the end. However, he has different plans. He's going for my king's side. I try my best to ignore his attack, continuing my fight on the queen side. But then pawn f4 looks very dangerous with the idea of pawn f3, so I come back with the queen. He trades. I think I'm in the clear, but then queen g5, attacking my g3 pawn. And I don't like to play knight e2, although it's probably best, because queen e3 is an annoying move. So I try rook takes rook, trading pieces to minimize his attack. Then his move knight f4 that I totally missed. And maybe I should ignore his attack, because as long as I just defend my knight on d3, or I move it. I don't think his attack actually works. However, I was determined to prove him wrong, so I took. He took. Now his bishop on g7 is active. I defend my knight on c3, but then his f-pawn becomes as powerful as a piece. I'm getting forced back. He's bringing in his bishop, threatening g1 mate with the queen. So I attempt to trade the queens. He comes in with a check. Wins back the piece, still with a raging attack on me. I desperately try and do my only source of counterplay with the move a6. Black, I think, is totally winning here. Queen d1, I defend. f2 looked really scary. There was also bishop d4 as well, looked scary as well. I play knight f2, desperately defending in this hopeless looking position. Queen c1, going for my rook. I defend, I save the rook and defend my knight on f2. Queen b1 I'm not sure is the right move, but it still kept the pressure. Rook d2, my plan was potentially to sacrifice on d4, but then disaster. Black took on e4 with only a minute left on his clock. Missing knight takes bishop, knight takes queen. Bishop takes queen, king takes, and then he doesn't have enough for the sacrificed piece, or the blundered piece, so he resigned. This game did finish outside the time limit though, so it didn't count. So I did very well. I got 11 games, 10 wins and 1 loss. I was third overall. One of my teammates was berserking a lot, and he got, I think, 35 points in the tournament. I got 31, but with this win it would have been 35 as well, if it had counted. And then one of the players I beat, who hung that rook to get mated early in the game, he got, I think, 37 or 38 points. But my team did end up winning the team battle. I think there were about 7 teams who played, and it was an enjoyable event with lots of players who were 2,000 plus, and a few 1700s thrown in as well. Hope you enjoyed the video and found it entertaining, and I'll see you next time. Bye.